I'm Harper Lane, 29, a marketing professional in Colorado Springs. I live in the guest house behind my parents' place, David and Sandra, sending $1,500 every month toward their mortgage as part of a live and save for my own place deal. Everything looked reasonable, my schedule ticking like a metronome, coffee at dawn, days packed with emails and decks, nights closing numbers, weekends running in Monument Valley Park to clear my head. I called it the plan: work, save, repeat. And I figured if nothing went sideways in about a year, I'd be turning a key in my first home. Then Blake, my younger brother, arrived with a duffel bag heavy as a debt ledger, a haze of cheap cologne, and a long list of balances his card couldn't cover. He'd left Denver after losing a bartending job, but what he brought back wasn't resolve. It was the habit of overspending and a handful of betting apps he hadn't uninstalled. On his first night, he shrugged and bragged about an $800 leather jacket like it was a trophy, while I did the math on how many months of instant noodles it would take to offset a swipe like that. I raised it at dinner, trying to keep my voice even as I said he needed a real job, not another big plan that would burst like foam. Mom looked at me, her mouth set firm under a soft tone. Family means we shoulder things together. Dad nodded, face locked like someone had miscalculated the math of honor. You're doing well, you can carry it. I heard it and understood. We in my house meant I paid, they encouraged, and Blake spent. I kept transferring the mortgage money each month, kept ticking down the save for down payment board, but something inside me began to tilt. One evening when I said flat out I wasn't raiding my savings for Blake's debt, Dad slammed the table, face flushing the color of a poured bourbon, and barked, "Pack your things and don't come back." The sentence cut through me like a cold blade. I stood there then. The only thing left was the sound of my heart knocking like a fist on wood. I walked into the yard, the smell of wet grass and cold air on my face, like a thrown pail of water, and I knew I'd been exiled from the very backyard I still called home. The next morning, a strange bank envelope arrived. I tore it open, hands a little shaky, eyes reading every line crystal clear. A credit card opened in my name, under my social security number, $5,000 of charges at bars, gaming platforms, car rentals. I had never opened that account, but I knew who had. I carried the statement straight into the main house. Blake leaned on the stove, waiting for leftovers to heat up, thumb flicking his phone like he was checking the weather. I held up the page. "You opened a card in my name?" He shrugged without looking hard. "It's not a big deal. You've got money." The way he said "not a big deal" made my nose sting. I said, "That's fraud." He smirked. "I'll handle it tomorrow." Sometimes indifference is a razor. I turned to my parents, hoping at least for a "we're sorry." Mom shook her head, voice damp but still pleading the angle of mercy. "Don't say he's a criminal. He just stumbled." Dad looked at me and laid down the order. "Pay it, then we'll deal with him." It sounded like a remixed version of Family Shares, except the lead vocal always fell on me. That night I called the bank, filed the fraud claim, froze the card, and locked my credit at Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion, sitting up late at the laptop filling out forms as carefully as trimming a split nail. I realized my homeownership dream was fragile enough to skid off track with one forged signature. The next morning, in a team meeting at the agency, I presented a media mix for a Rocky Mountain regional retailer. Someone asked about the digital allocation. I answered, but the person next to me tilted their head. "You good?" I pressed a smile and said, "Yeah," and went back to the screen. Around here, "yeah" is the lid over the storm. I decided to talk to Blake clearly one last time. I told him, "Stop spending, get a job, tell me straight how much you owe." He glanced at me like I was a pop-up ad, irritating and easy to close. He repeated the lines about "in the process, offer any day now, just need a little luck." I looked him in the eye and saw no plan, just habit. I understood that as long as I stayed in my parents' backyard, my boundaries would never be thick enough to protect me. I called Tessa Morales, my college best friend. Tessa listened and said one sentence that felt weightless and concrete all at once. "Move in with me, it'll be tight, but freedom isn't." I opened a fresh budget, drew 2 columns. Stay, cheap, but bled dry, and leave, costlier for a while, but no hands in my pockets. The numbers said sharing rent with Tessa still beat the $1,500 I was carrying. More than that, I was stepping out of the role of ATM on a leash. I still transferred the final month to my parents, closing out a contract at term. But in my head, I had already turned the wheel. The family meet-in blew in like a forecasted storm that arrived early. Dad stood near the window, his shadow long across the carpet. Mom sat wringing in her hands white. Blake lounged with one ankle over a knee, eyes glued to his screen, like our talk was the late game's point spread. Dad said, "Blake's debt is $10,000. You cover it, or you leave and don't come back." Mom tried to soften the runway with, "He's weak. He tripped and family sacrifices." I looked at them, then at myself from the ceiling down, wondering why I was standing there like a sponsor invited to a press conference without my name on the backdrop. I said slowly, "I'm not covering it." Dad smacked his palm on the table. "Then go." I answered, "Then from this second on, every bill I've covered goes too." No one said another word, and the silence wasn't peace. It was a period. I moved out quietly. I booked a small moving truck, texted Jordan Park, my coworker who jokes I'm the KPI locomotive, to lend a hand. Clothes into bags, books into boxes, laptop into a backpack, storage labels to keep Blake from snooping. I skipped the bulky stuff, didn't keep the wobbly shelf or the swayback chair. I wanted light. Tessa arrived, squeezed my hand like, "Let's go," and we worked like two people who'd rehearsed in our heads. The rain misted, streets skinned with water, boxes breathing out the musty smell of storage. The guest house door clicked shut behind me. I laid a note on the table before locking up. "Mom and Dad, I've left. I've paid $100 each month as promised." But when Dad said, "Go and don't come back," the agreement ended. I won't cover Blake's debts. I choose to protect my future. I signed my name, the first strokes a little shaky, then straightening into a new border. Tessa's place was truly small. Tiny table, a crooked bookshelf that looked like it was grinning, floors that creaked with every step. But every creak was a note of freedom. I woke early, ran over the bridge, watched the mist catch on the grass, came home to make breakfast, opened my budget spreadsheet with the sense that my money finally meant mine. I opened a new bank account, unwound every tie to the main house, changed every password I could change, added two-factor like sliding new deadbolts into place. At night, I shut the laptop at 10 and no borrow for a bit. ISID text fell onto the screen. I felt lighter in a literal way. 3 weeks passed and Mom called. Her voice was the sandpaper rasp of someone who'd used up tears on hold with a bank. "They're threatening foreclosure. Could you cover a few months, then we'll figure it out." I stood by the window, city lights like open squares below, a misted heart feeling inside, and a hot hand grip around a fresh cup of coffee. "Dad kicked me out," I said. "I'm respecting that decision." The line went silent and heavy as a river stone in a coat pocket. That night, Tessa and I ate pizza off the box, TV low, cola fizzing in tiny pops. Tessa tapped the cardboard's edge. "You did the right thing." I hummed in agreement and chewed pepperoni, the salt bringing this small, surprising release through my shoulders. My cousin's update said Blake hadn't changed at all. He still spent, still promised, still slipped. Red letter envelopes piled up, past due mortgage, late utilities, a choking car note, bet and balances looming. My parents began to fight. When I was a kid, raised voices were rare, and now they stood at either end of a knotted rope, each tugging toward their version of control. Dad wanted to cut the bad limb off the money tree. Mom wanted one more chance to keep the house quiet. I wasn't giddy or triumphant. I felt the even sadness you reserve for someone looping a lesson that's too simple. Adults pay for the choices they make. As for me, I left right on time. At work, my campaign took flight. The brand lift chart ran like a clean track after rain. CPC down, CTR up, the postmortem glowing with numbers that spoke for themselves. Whitaker called me into the office and slid an email across the desk. "Senior strategist, you earned it." I nodded and thanked her. I didn't cry over money. The thing that stung my eyes was realizing I no longer needed permission to be left alone to do my job. On a quiet night, Mom called again. This time I put it on speaker so Tessa could hear. I needed a witness for my boarders. Mom wept and said, "Just 1 month to get past the deadline." I said, "I've paid for years." She said, "Blake is trying." I slipped and said, "Trying to spend more?" I took a breath and spoke slowly. "I won't pay. I won't come back." Mom whispered, "Are you not family anymore?" The word family in her mouth felt like a lead weight debt. I said, "I'm still your daughter, I'm just not a wallet." I hung up and watched the phone sit there on the wood like an ordinary object. It used to be the rope dragging me backward. Today it was just a device. The next morning, an email from Dad. No dear, no sorry, just an itemized list, and family must stand together. I didn't write long. I replied with one line. You told me, go and don't come back at 8:37 p.m. that night. From that second, all financial obligations between us ended. Please respect your own decision. I hit send and felt my heart settle into the even pulse of a clock with a new battery. A week later, the post office handed me a thick envelope. Dad's letter, in his handwriting from when I was 8, straight, a little left-leaning. He wrote about the first time he signed for a mortgage, the thrill of gripping the wheel, and then the breathless lurch when money moved like a tide. He said he hated losing so much that my no looked like betrayal. At the end, he wrote, "Maybe I was wrong. Strength isn't making someone else carry, it's carrying your own." I folded the letter, the edge of the paper catching my fingertip with a small red line. I told myself that maybe someday we'd sit on a back porch, drink tea, and name mistakes exactly as they are. No trimming, no padding. Blake sent me 7 words. "Are you happy now, sis?" I stared, then smiled a little. Happiness for me wasn't an expensive dinner or an $800 jacket anymore. It was a quiet phone after 10, an account nobody could borrow. A weekend morning where I brewed coffee, opened the window, and felt the cold off Pike's Peak wake my cheeks. I typed, "I'm at peace." Then I blocked his number, not out of hate, but out of respect, for the boundary I'd built with sweat and a handful of sleepless nights. Time went on as evenly as highway lines. I brought the cactus from the old guest house and set it on Tessa's windowsill. It's absurdly tough, sprouting a tiny green nub every week like a wave hello, reminding me some things outlast storms by simply needing less. My team and I closed another account. Jordan high-fived. We did it. For the first time in years, we didn't make me flinch. We here means each person owns their part and lifts others when possible. Nobody assumes rights to anyone else's card. News of the old house came on a Thursday with Chris Bear. They didn't lose it to foreclosure, but they had to short sell. My parents moved into a smaller place near Powers. My cousin said the arguments tapered off. The loud words were spent, and what remained was cleanup. Mom texted, "I'm learning to say no to Blake." I read it again and again like a fresh prayer, not because it's holy, but because it's rare. I wasn't rushing back, and I didn't want to whitewash the record like nothing had happened. I keep things as they occurred, bills I paid, emails I sent, Dad's letter, and my reply. I don't write fairy tales on real life. I live by a simple rule. If you respect me, I stay. If you shove me out with an invoice, I go. Sometimes people ask, if they apologized, would you forgive them? I think for a moment and say that forgiveness isn't a return ticket. It's setting down the emotional debt that isn't mine to carry. If someday we share a meal, I'll talk about boundaries the way people talk about weather. Today the sky is clear, and so am I. On a weekend night, I walked through downtown, neon bouncing off damp sidewalks after a misting rain, a bar leaking the chorus of some old song. I paused outside the cafe where Blake and I once argued about a latte, ridiculously priced. I laughed, without acid, only light. The mountain wind slid into my collar, cold and waking. I opened my phone and typed a note to myself I wouldn't post. Don't mistake kindness for obligation. Don't call endurance love. Home is where your heart can stay without paying ransom. I locked the screen, pocketed the phone, and listened to my steps drum out like a little counter. The next morning I rose early, the sky just lifting. On the table was the payment schedule for the car I chose and the insurance I signed. I brewed coffee, wrapped my hands around the heat, opened an email from my boss that read, "Great job." I smiled, not for the praise, but because I was reading it in a small room I pay for, next to a cactus casting a shadow like a compass needle. Straight, neat, stubborn. I remembered Dad's line, "Strength isn't making someone else carry, it's carrying your own." I added my half sentence, just loud enough inside my head, and knowing what to lay down when it isn't yours. At noon, a missed call from an unknown number. I didn't return it. I sat down, opened a new deck, and typed the first lines for another campaign. Outside the window, the range stood like a rampart. I thought of the night Dad told me to go and not come back the moment I answered him with his own words, and the fine, decisive line that split my before and after. People say life is a series of doors opening and closing. I'm not sure. Sometimes you just hand back the key that never opened piece, and every door behind you shuts on its own, while a bright frame opens ahead. I sipped my coffee, breathed deep, and knew this with a clarity that warmed me from the inside out. Real love never comes with an invoice.